Starting a Turo fleet can be a challenge, but starting a Turo fleet while also managing a 9-to-5 job can be an even bigger challenge. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down what I would do if I was starting a Turo fleet from scratch in 2024 while also managing a 9-to-5 job. So let's get started. Now, many people who are casual viewers of this channel may not remember or realize that whenever I started Turo, before my husband quit his job to join our fleet full time, I managed my Turo fleet on my own, while also juggling multiple other side gigs, a full-time job, and a YouTube channel. And it was a lot. I've also had the pleasure to get to know a ton of different Turo hosts that have managed to work their full-time job in conjunction with starting and growing a Turo fleet. And I've learned a ton of cool tips and tricks from them on how they do this successfully. And believe it or not, it is definitely possible, but it is challenging to have a successful Turo fleet in conjunction with having a successful 9-to-5 career, even if that career is in person. There is a learning curve, no doubt, and I'm absolutely not saying that it's easy, but it is possible for people who really want to do it. So the first thing that I would do if I was starting a Turo fleet in 2024 while juggling my full-time job is to, number one, get comfortable with the Turo terms of service. And number two is I would accept and embrace remote key exchanges. I think remote key exchanges are the only way to succeed at Turo and have a full-time job at the same time. And the reason why I clump reading the terms of service into this point is because I think in order to really be successful with remote key exchanges, you need to first understand the ins and outs of Turo. How do remote key exchanges work? What are the do's and don'ts of Turo? When should you take photos? How many photos? What are the different timelines? How do reimbursements work? These are all questions that new Turo hosts have, and in order to really learn the ins and outs of how all these different facets work, you really should read the Turo terms of service. Now, when it comes to remote key exchanges and how it works whenever somebody books a car through a remote key exchange, this is the general flow of how it operates. First is someone will book your car, and instead of meeting them in person, they verify their license through the Turo app. You confirm your license info matches what Turo has on file and that everything is valid, and then about an hour or maybe 30 minutes before your rental, you send the guest a lockbox code giving them access to your car via a lockbox or a remote unlock and locking system. Whenever that car goes out on a reservation, as long as you have photos that are no more than 24 hours old, you do not need to meet that guest in person and you don't need to retake those photos. This means that as long as you have valid photos in your phone at all times, you can do a remote key exchange from work any day of the week. I rely heavily on having photos in my phone at all times of my cars that aren't on active rentals, and I rely heavily on remote key exchanges. I did in the past whenever I worked a more traditional full-time job, and I still do today whenever I have so much going on. This adds a ton of flexibility to my day, and it makes it so that I don't have to be glued to my cars or glued to my parking lot all the time waiting for cars to get booked out or for guests to come pick up a vehicle. You can take photos of your cars in the evening after you get off work or in the early morning before you go to work. A car can then get booked out while you're at work, and all you have to do is upload the photos, maybe exchange a couple of messages with the guest, and then you're good to go. There's really nothing else to do from there. And on the same note of remote key exchanges, I would also encourage you to have a really well thought out messaging system for your guests. Really ask yourself, what are the questions that people are asking you? What does that back and forth look like? And try to set up automated messages. That way you can limit the back and forth. This makes managing your Turo fleet and having a full-time job so much easier, because I definitely recognize that not all jobs allow for you to be on your phone really easily and openly. So you want to make sure that you have that automated messaging system really efficiently set up. With the remote key exchanges, you could theoretically facilitate a key exchange from anywhere in the world, whether it's overseas in a meeting or just from the comfort of your living room. You just need to make sure that you have those photos that are no more than 24 hours old, and you need to make sure that you understand how to really verify that guest license, because that's absolutely crucial. On the same note is I would have a system and process for when you want to be going in to check in cars for your fleet. I know a lot of people who will go in and check in cars before or after work for an hour, take photos of their cars, then those photos are now valid for 24 hours, and they just do that every day. Back in the day, I'm talking like 2017, I remember that there was an OG Turo fleet owner who had like 40 or 50 cars at the time, which was a huge amount of cars for that period of time, and he also juggled a 9-to-5 as well. And I remember talking to him and hearing about how before work he would wake up at 4 a.m., he would check in his cars for a few hours, and then after work he would do the exact same thing until like 9, 10, 11 p.m. And he would just do this every single day to ensure that he could have his fleet and also have his job. Now, I'm not saying that you have to do that. I'm not even saying that you should do that, but I am saying is that it is possible. Having kind of a known system and process of how you're going to go about doing this will make your life a lot easier. And so knowing that, hey, you need to wake up at 6 a.m. instead of waking up at 7:30 to go check in some cars in the morning, or having it in your head of, okay, right after work, you're going to go check in cars. Having that outlined and planned out will make your life so much easier. For example, back whenever I was more actively involved in the day-to-day of my Turo fleet, every single evening before I would be done for the day, I would simply go down to the lot and I would take fresh photos of all my cars. That way I knew that all of those photos would be good for the next 24 hours, and I wouldn't have to worry about rushing down to my lot in the morning or being disrupted in the afternoon or in the evening to check in a car. I knew I had fresh photos on my phone, and I knew that everything was ready to go if it was going to get booked out. Having a schedule of when you're going to check in cars, when you're going to take photos, and sort of knowing how that plays out during a rolling 24-hour period, that makes your life so much easier. Next is probably the most crucial aspect of having a Turo fleet and also having a 9-to-5, and that is understanding the unavailability settings available to you as a Turo host. These are the things that you're going to want to be utilizing to not only make sure that you're not on call 24/7 for your Turo fleet, but it's also going to make sure that your cars don't get booked out while you're at work and if they haven't been checked in yet. But it's also what you're going to be using to make sure that your cars don't accidentally get booked out when they really shouldn't be. And now that Turo has standard automatic bookings for every trip, as well as adjusting how extensions are done, it's more important than ever to make sure that you're familiar with Turo unavailability settings, that way you can utilize them appropriately. Now, when it comes to managing your Turo fleet to ensure that your cars are either marked off or marked as available whenever they should be, you have a few settings at your disposal, and you should be using these strategically to make sure that your cars are only getting booked out when they should be booked, but also being utilized as often as possible. The first one that you'll want to look at is your host settings. Now, I have mine set to always available, but you can have yours set to available from, say, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. It doesn't really matter. Now, I've talked about this a lot in my videos in the past, so I'm not going to belabor the point here, but I am a strong believer that you should have your host settings set to always available, and you should instead manage your vehicles on a per vehicle basis and the additional settings that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. But the reason why I'm such a proponent of having your host settings set to always available is because, let's say, for example, you have your host settings set from available from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. That's whenever people can book your car. Well, if you have that set as your availability, your car is only available to book from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Somebody could book it later, but they wouldn't be able to pick it up unless it's in that time frame. Well, let's say that you have a car that got returned, say, at 5 p.m. You cleaned the car, you vacuumed it, you took photos, and now this car is ready to go out, but it doesn't have a booking currently lined up for it. Well, once 7 p.m. rolls around, that car can no longer get booked out for the rest of that day, even though that car is ready to go. It's going to have to wait until 7 a.m. the next morning, whenever it's eligible to be picked up again for that next booking. So if somebody's looking for a rental for, say, 6 a.m. the next morning, or 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., you're not going to be able to facilitate that rental even though your car is ready, because your host settings prevent it. By keeping your availability set to 24 hours, you can make sure that you can accommodate any rental for your fleet if your car is ready to go. By having host settings set to always available, your cars are always ready to be booked out, and you 100% will get more utilization. And to ensure that you're not on call with your fleet 24/7 and that your cars don't get booked out prematurely, you can use these two settings to really manage the availability effectively. So again, the first method is to use your host settings as I just showed. The second method is to use your calendar. Now, I heavily rely on my calendar, and I adjust my availability of my vehicles on a per vehicle basis depending on what's going on with that specific vehicle. You can adjust your vehicle settings on a per vehicle basis depending on if you're in a meeting, if you're going to bed, if the car got returned and you're not ready to check it in yet, and you can adjust your settings to prevent it from going out whenever it shouldn't be going out. So for example, obviously we don't want cars getting booked and going out on rentals while we're asleep, so every night before we go to bed, we go in and we block the cars off that don't have active bookings or ones that aren't prepped and ready to go for the next morning. So we may block off a car from, say, 10 p.m. until 10 a.m. But if we have a car that's prepped and ready to go, we may instead just book that car off from like 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. because I wake up early and I can see if a booking got booked for, say, 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. and we're able to facilitate that rental because that car is prepped and ready to go. Now, I get asked all the time, well, doesn't that take a lot of time? And the answer is no, it only takes a few seconds. And once you get the hang of it, it is extremely easy easy and it's a very effective way to manage your car availability. But you can do this exact same thing and have this exact same thought process if you're at work as well. So for example, if a car gets returned at noon and you know that you're not going to be able to check in that car until 5 p.m. or 6 p.m., just simply block off that car in your calendar to prevent it from going out on another rental. You can be super aggressive with calendar blocks, even like far out in the future, to prevent having cars go out whenever you can facilitate a rental. So for example, if you have a car that is getting returned at 2 p.m. and that rental isn't for 2 weeks, you could prematurely go in there and then block out that calendar until say 6 or 7 p.m. that night, even 2 weeks in advance, to make sure that nobody else comes through and books a car for that period of time. And then if whenever that time comes, if that guest wants to extend the rental, chances are they'll go into the app, they'll see that the car isn't available, and then they'll message you directly. And you can say, yeah, I actually had a calendar block, let me clear that. And you can clear that calendar block and allow for that guest to extend. So calendar blocks can be used pretty far in advance to ensure that your availability is getting managed effectively, and that way you can check in your cars and manage your full-time job really nicely. The last setting that you'll want to familiarize yourself with is vehicle snoozes. The difference between a calendar block and a vehicle snooze is pretty straightforward, but I do think a lot of new hosts get these two things confused. In fact, in my experience, I think even Turo reps get it confused. So a calendar block blocks off your car for the amount of time that is blocked in the calendar, but your car still shows up in Turo search result. Let's say, for example, you have a calendar block for October 15th. If somebody is looking on Turo, even though your car has an active calendar block, your car is still going to show up in search results. But if somebody tries to book your car with the October 15th date in there, it's going to be shown as unavailable. So your car will still show up in search results. It's just unable to be booked for the specific day or time of the calendar block. Both vehicle snoozes, it actually takes your car out of search results while the car is snoozed. So if your car is snoozed, it's basically like it doesn't exist on the Turo platform. It's not going to show up. The way that I use snoozes, and I use snoozes a lot, I use snooze all the time with my vehicles, and the way in which I utilize it is two ways. Number one is if my cars are in repair or getting maintenance done and I don't know exactly when that maintenance is going to be completed, I will do snoozes in this instance. But the second way that I use it very, very heavily is with extenders. Now, if a vehicle is snoozed, somebody can't book your car, but a guest who already has the car can extend it. This is a great tool to use because it's a great way to ensure that nobody else can book your car if you have a long-term renter. Now, for my fleet, at any given time, I have about 25% of my cars that are on extended rentals. And so I rely heavily on snoozing those vehicles to ensure that the renters can keep extending over and over and over again. So understanding and really using these three settings to your benefit will make your life so much easier whenever it comes to managing your Turo fleet and also having a 9-to-5. Snoozing, calendar blocks, as well as your host settings. But the final tip that I have for you is a relatively straightforward one, and that is to have some sort of partner involved in your Turo fleet. Now, it doesn't have to be a true partner that has like a stake in the business and has some skin in the game. It could be a family member, it could be a family friend, it could even just be somebody that you know that you have available to you in a worst case scenario. This is somebody that you could call if for some reason a car got booked out whenever it really shouldn't have. Or maybe you're stuck in traffic or you got called into work later than you thought and you need somebody to clean a car quickly for you. This is somebody who understands Turo, or at least is aware of it, that you would be able to call in for a favor if needed. Now, different people have filled this role for me over the years. Of course, my husband HP is my business partner and my spouse, but I've also used my dad, my sisters, family, friends for these types of roles whenever I'm really in a pinch, and it has been a huge lifesaver. So having that person in the back of your mind that you would call if something went wrong, if you needed some help, that will definitely help you long term. So there you have it. This is what I would do if I was starting a Turo fleet in 2024 while also working a full-time job. If you guys are interested in starting and scaling your car sharing fleet like I do, then you should check out the Car Sharing Masterclass. It's my course that teaches you everything you need to know about starting and scaling a car sharing fleet with the same business model that I use, which is low-end economy cash vehicles. You can use the code OFFER100 to get $100 off that purchase. The link is down in the description below. And like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it. So make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.